So today I'm pleased to present my work in empowering immigrant ministry. So this is not a surprise to any of you, but when I was developing my capstone vision, there were several things that I wanted to try to bring together. One was I wanted it to be very practical. I was kind of weary of the academic silo and ready to spread my wings a little bit. And then I wanted to bring together something that capitalized on my history in teaching, both in a private school and then in the English classroom, as well as my longstanding interest in cross-cultural ministry. And so what I ended up with was a vision to empower local churches and individual believers to minister to immigrants through sacrificial acts of service and English language instruction. And this project kind of morphed a little bit, but there were four basic components that I worked on. The first was research, and this was a pretty small part of it, but researching effective ESL strategies, and I'll talk more about each of these throughout the presentation. And then developing the Bridges ESL program. So I've worked there for 3.5 years, and so wanted to kind of build out some of the gaps that I saw. And then facilitating the resettlement of 2 families from Afghanistan who just recently arrived in Boston, and then launching an ESL program for Afghans in Minneapolis. So what I'll do is go through each of these briefly and give kind of the process and some of the takeaways from each of them. So on the research front, so my question basically was, what are the essential ingredients of an ESL ministry that catalyzes community for its students and results in disciples of Christ? And this took only about 15% of my capstone, so it was a pretty small chunk. And I'm somewhat remiss about that because I think there was a lot of unplowed ground that I encountered. So what the dominant way that I went about this research question was interacting with people who do it. So my goal was 15 ESL ministry practitioners. I only hit 11. My goal was 20 students, and I only hit 5. Turns out it's a lot more difficult to find students who are willing to have an interview than what I anticipated. But the basic results then were a summary report of what I found, and then a handbook that's targeted at 2 different audiences. So the one audience is people who said, hey, I'm interested in getting started with ESL ministry, but I have no idea what to do. So there's one component for that. And then the other is, okay, so I've been doing ESL ministry for a while, but I'm not really seeing fruit. Is there something I should be really focusing on? So some best practices or guiding principles that more seasoned ESL ministries can implement. And I'll just give you kind of the high level what those 5 were. And quite frankly, most of these were not surprising. But I'm just going to talk very high level about these, mention them, and then give you some examples. So first was being willing to adopt the farmer mentality. So recognizing that any kind of ministry really is something that takes a long time. Like we can't, in the words of one practitioner, it's never zero to hero. It takes time, and especially when you're communicating across languages. So it takes a mindset of people who are willing to faithfully plant seeds and water seeds that are already there and wait for the harvest. The second piece was connecting the local church and the ESL ministry. Surprisingly, only 27% of those practitioners I interviewed indicated that this was an important priority for them. The others just didn't talk about it. But of the students I interviewed, there was 3 who have been converted through ESL ministry. All 3 of those said that the church was a vital role in their coming into the kingdom and understanding the gospel. One of the students in particular talked about a proverb, a Chinese proverb that goes something like, you can move a mountain, but you cannot change a man's heart. But what the church provided for him was this plausibility structure, to borrow from James Hunter, which is like this visible demonstration, like, oh, wow, like this is what it means. So these ideas that I hear in church, these ideas I read about in the Bible, this is what it looks like to live it out. And it provided him a front row seat into transformation. He saw transformation happening And he said, oh, wow, if it can happen for them, it can happen for me. The third piece is creating community with strengths-based approach. It's hard to understate the loneliness, the feelings of inadequacy, the depletion of value that immigrants experience upon arrival in a new country. Without getting into all the details, I'll just say that the classroom, the ESL classroom, is an incredible place to bestow dignity onto students in the ways that you draw in their life experiences and allow them to teach you about their home country, about their food, about their values, cultural norms, important holidays, religious holidays for them, and so on. And so really capitalizing on the rich tapestry of experiences that adult learners bring to the classroom, placing a premium on relationships, and then pursuing excellence. Anabaptists are known for craftsmanship and work ethic. Unfortunately, for many who get involved in ESL ministry, it's kind of this side gig. So it's a part-time volunteer thing at a local ministry, or it's a short-term mission trip, or maybe it's a 1 or 2 year thing. So there's very little thought into preparation, like how can I become really good at this? And yet, nearly 100% of the practitioners said, this is important. We can't be pulling a bait and switch where we're saying English, but we are really there just to brainwash people or something like that. So this is a really vital piece. And in the handbook that I developed, I laid out a series of steps for people who want to get training. Like, here's where you could start. Here's another place to go, and so on. So that was the research part. Then working at the bridge. So this was something I'd wanted to do for a while, is examine, okay, so we're an English school. There are other English schools in Boston. So who's doing what? So I looked at 17 different, quote, competitors. Some of them were not in Boston. And then I also created a survey for the local church, kind of gauging interest level, awareness level, and so on. And then I also co-taught a pilot course with Clay Wagler, which was filling a gap in our program. Many English curricula assume that students can read, they can write a little bit, maybe even speak a little bit. But I had, in my years so far, I had not found something that took people from 0 to that level. And so there's this gap of people we just couldn't, it was very difficult to interact with. English for Newcomers was produced by Summer Institute of Linguistics for recently arrived immigrants. It's a 60 lesson course that focuses on the growing participator approach method to learning languages, which is more immersive. Think TPR, think Sattler, biblical languages. So very, very similar to that. And it's designed to take people from 0, they don't have to be able to speak or read anything, to conversational in 60 lessons, at least be able to interact. And while it was difficult to gauge like the level of those coming into the class, by the end of the class, like I was able to have conversations with my students, and it was fantastic. Wow. It was really, really neat. And it's free, it's available for download, editable. It's amazing. And then I kind of took all of these experiences and the research I did and gave 20 recommendations to the bridge. Here's how you can improve. And I'll give you just a brief sampling of some of those. The first was facilitating life skills workshops. So over 50% of those, of the church survey respondents said, hey, I would be interested in doing this. Like life skills workshops, that's something I could do. And yet we haven't been doing it. And it really builds off of 2 other recommendations I gave. One was context-specific classes. So generally in the English world, you have like level 1, level 2, level 3. But instead, I recommend that we start doing budgeting or parenting or health, like English related to a particular domain of life, job search, resume building, these kinds of things. Another one I gave was developing a rigorous pronunciation program. So admittedly, this will take some specialization on the staffing, but there's very few people who do it. I think there's only 2 or 3 in the Boston area who explicitly offer this. And yet, this is more anecdotal, but in my experience at the bridge, many people say, I would love to have pronunciation classes, like where I can get practice learning the unique pronunciation problems for my language group. And so I think developing something like that would help the bridge kind of fill a niche place in the field. And another one that I gave was facilitating a church family adopting a class. This is something that I've thrown around, but a number of times it hasn't really taken hold. But basically a family would say, okay, this class, we adopt you for the semester or for the year or whatever. We're gonna come in, we're gonna bring our children in, you get to meet our children, play games with our children, bring snacks, invite them over, have class in my backyard, go on field trips together. It'd be an amazing way to bridge the gap between the church and the ESL ministry, which was one of the research findings, was making sure that connection is really strong. And again, if you want more information on that, I'd be happy to give that. So that was the bridge development. Then there was the facilitating refugee resettlement. This admittedly was far more complex than I ever could have imagined. It came on, it was an opportunity that came after my capstone started, convinced my advisors that it fit within my vision, and they agreed. It ended up taking 25% of my capstone time, but it was really facilitating a collaborative church effort, making sure that just things are being covered. So we did a lot of house searching. We failed at the house searching. As of last night, I finally got a message from the resettlement agency saying, hey, we have housing for both families in Dorchester, which wasn't what we envisioned, but I was so relieved I almost cried. It was just like, finally, there's something here for them. We fundraised over $40,000. Some brothers from the church facilitated gathering household items for both families, basically, to where we have what they need to get set up in the house, and we're ready to move it. Lots of friendship and community. Put a little plug in here for Afgan food. It is amazing. One of the things I developed then as kind of a product from this component was a checklist of things that I wish I would have known this before I signed up. And so I think it's about 10 items or so of things that I really wish I would have known. For example, it's really important to establish clear communication channels with the agency from the beginning and know what that relationship is going to be like. Have consistent communication. There were multiple variables that made that piece particularly challenging, including the differences between the two most recent United States administrations and how they interacted with the immigrant numbers. Another one was just, do they have particular preferences or even demands for the kinds of things that you should be bringing for household furnishings, preferences for bed types, and so on. Apparently there were some of those. So yeah, this piece was very complex, and the relationship dynamics with the families, only one individual spoke English, and so there was one communication between these two families that were related. And it really was quite challenging, but also very rewarding, and will definitely serve as a bridge to something that continues post-graduation. The final piece of my capstone was launching an ESL program for Anabaptist Refugee Committee in Minneapolis. I had reached out to them last fall. They formed in response to the Afghan evacuation, and we're basically like, okay, we need to do something. How do we respond to this? How can we serve these people coming to the US? And I reached out to them last fall. First day of this semester, I had a phone call, and he's like, hey, we want you to develop an English program for us. I was like, okay. So I threw together a proposal from scratch that included things like guiding principles for how I think about starting something like this, based on my work at the Bridge, based off of things I learned in peacemaking class and human trafficking classes and so on. And then kind of my understanding of the need based off of my interactions with immigrants, based off of what I was reading about those coming and so on. And then program objectives that sought to address those needs, curriculum recommendations, and some suggested cultural orientation materials. After they said, we love it, let's do it, I put together a teacher training course. It was really interesting doing this project in conjunction with the kinds of things I was seeing in my research, where it didn't feel like I was even really able to align it well with what I had discovered in my research about excellence and tying it to a local church. Like those two pieces were kind of missing. It's basically a voluntary service unit for Anabaptist young people at this point. But we launched classes anyway in February, and throughout the semester provided ongoing teacher support with weekly meetings. And then most recently gave a proposal for, hey, here's how we can take this to the next level. So when we started, we used the English for Newcomers curriculum. And so we're kind of hitting a pretty small number of students in terms of the overall population, those who have very little English exposure. So now we're just getting ready to start kind of phase 2, where we're addressing or offering classes for upper level students. And then this again is a strong bridge into post-graduation, where I'll be continuing to serve as their English program coordinator. Admittedly, this piece and the resettlement piece, the bridge was almost too strong into post-Sattler, where like I do have other parts of my life that I'm living as well. And these are, I don't quite know how I'm going to manage all of that yet. I do have some suggestions for future capstone projects. So these were things that I came across throughout the semester. I was like, wow, if I would do another one, or if I could tell the next classes, here are some great ideas, this is what I would tell you. This first one is barely a capstone. It's not a full capstone for sure, but it would really be working to develop a series of stories that would accompany newcomers. Similar to how Dr. Schumann has the Hebrew stories that serve as the context and the reinforcement for the vocabulary we're learning in Hebrew. So this would basically be writing stories based off of the vocabulary given that would serve as that for the newcomers curriculum. And I can envision a number of different ways that the curriculum could be expanded. You would probably have to rewrite some of the lesson plans to incorporate this, but that would be one suggestion. Another one is to research and develop an English program for English language learners who come and can read and write, but cannot speak and have a really difficult time listening. So many friends from China fall into this category, where the learning model is very heavily focused on reading and being able to write. And it's not phonetic based, it's more memorization based. So it's just, I write the word apple 100 times so I can recognize it. It's not knowing that a and p and o equal apple, right? And so it seems like there's gotta be a way to develop a program to accelerate individuals like that to where they have that base already. What gaps could we easily fill in to just move people very quickly into conversational and beyond? It seems like there's got to be a solution there. And then the last piece comes from my work with the families. The most difficult piece was the housing. Yes, we do live in Boston. Yes, the housing market was a little ridiculous this spring. Yes, to a lot of things, but like there is so much potential for ministering to immigrants by having a program that you already have housing available. I don't know in what way. Like, so maybe you're starting a nonprofit. So a business student and a BRS student, or a couple people collaborating together and writing a business plan for a nonprofit organization that either owns a series of apartments or an apartment building, or creates this network of landlords who are amenable to this idea of having refugees living in their houses. And then having maybe it's a time-bound program, a year long, where people apply. You'd have to figure out the criteria, who can be accepted, but people could apply, and then they could maybe have a year. Basically give them a year's time, immediately, okay, we're home. We're at least in a home now, and we can start moving on with our lives. Basically, for my friends from Afghanistan, they're still in a hotel 4 months later, and their life is just on pause. Like we had a very hard time getting English classes for them. We couldn't start looking for jobs. They couldn't start school because they don't have a permanent address. So the quicker you can get them into more permanent temporary housing is the better, right? And the potential for this is incredible. I can envision offering English classes, life skills courses, personal finance. You know, for many people, they're coming from a very informal economy into a very formal economy. How do we navigate that? Offering something on that. Building community connections. It checks so many boxes. And I think would be an incredible way for the church to serve the community by offering this. So that's my capstone presentation. I do feel like I was successful in empowering the church and individual believers to minister to immigrants in their communities. And I praise God for that. There's a passage in Deuteronomy where God basically says, hey, Israel, love the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. And so I really hope that the ongoing impact of this will be for individuals and churches to rally around this call to love those among us who we might call strangers. And in this way, expand the kingdom and see the end of the age ushered in.